Welcome to the lesson, How to Ask for a Raise with or Without a Union. In human society, bargaining power is based on which party has the lower cost of leaving the relationship. It is not a pleasant thing to think about, but if a woman's cost of leaving an abusive relationship is high, she has little work experience or would lose her children, the man has more bargaining power. If workers have few choices of employers to work for, the employer has more bargaining power. Now, suppose you are trained as a Starbucks barista. You want to join a union to raise your wages. Let's take a look at a clip of Power in Action by watching a video about Starbucks raising wages.
So I reached out to Starbucks Workers United Organizing Committee. They're, of course, behind this major unionization push that's really quite literally sweeping the nation. According to the organization, more than 250 nationwide stores have filed petitions as of Tuesday, and there are more than 50 unionized Starbucks stores currently across the country. But they said that many of these proposed benefits have actually been proposed at the bargaining table in Buffalo, where it began. They said more specifically, Starbucks Workers United has already filed charges over Starbucks threats to exclude those unionized stores from receiving these new benefits. This isn't how labor law works, and Starbucks knows that. So, of course, lots of back and forth between these unionized stores, and Howard Schultz really saying that these young workers just want more. And he said that this is part of a larger trend, not unique to just Starbucks.
After watching that video, what do you think? Is it legal for Starbucks not to raise wages at its non-union stores? In this lesson, we'll review two examples of power in action: the Frito-Lay strike of 2021 and Starbucks organizing drives in 2022. Bargaining power refers to the relative capacity of parties in a negotiation to influence, to persuade, or secure an agreement with terms that best suit their objectives. The bargaining power of each party rests on several factors, and it shifts over time. In the summer of 2021, Frito-Lay workers went on strike to end what they called suicide shifts, forced long-hour shifts from about 10 to 14 hours. They went on strike because Frito-Lay wouldn't hire more workers. The workers were angry about the overtime. Frito-Lay posted a 20% increase in profits during the pandemic as demand for snacks had soared. Yet, Frito-Lay did not hire additional workers. Now, striking was risky for Frito-Lay workers. They lived in a part of Kansas with few other jobs. Some, if they had to commute, faced higher childcare costs. Many of the workers were women, had immigrant status problems, needed Frito-Lay's healthcare coverage, and had no savings. The cost of striking included the risk of losing their jobs and their benefits and not finding any other work nearby. In addition, this was the first time this Frito-Lay plant had ever went on strike. Despite the risks, the workers thought they could win. After all, workers were in short supply and snack food demand was high. The strike was costly for them. No strikers were paid during the 3-week strike, and they didn't know how long that strike would last. Frito-Lay workers must have been biting their fingernails. So what happened? In the end, Frito-Lay did not fire the strikers, and the union got a new contract that boosted wages, gave 1 day off a week, and ended those mandated suicide shifts. The Frito-Lay strike demonstrates that if one worker quits, protesting forced overtime, the employer faces a small cost and has the power, and the shifts continue. If all the workers threaten to quit, the union has more power. Frito-Lay must have calculated settling the strike was cheaper than not settling. The demand for corn chips was so high that foregoing output meant lost profits. In general, the bargaining power between employers and workers is relative. The power of the worker is the cost of quitting compared to the employer's cost of the worker quitting. Generally, employers have the upper hand if the worker's cost of leaving employment or quitting is high. When striking or negotiating for a wage, a person or a union must consider basic economics. Now, the great 19th century economist Alfred Marshall identified 4 main factors that determines a worker's or a group of workers' bargaining power. These 4 factors are called, appropriately, Marshalian determinants of labor demand. If you or your union is asking for a raise, consider, first, will the firm have to raise prices if you get a raise? Second, if prices increase, will demand for what you produce fall? Third, are there substitutes for you? And fourth, if there are substitutes, will the price for those substitutes increase when the demand for those substitutes increase? First, how much will the firm have to raise prices if labor costs go up? For example, estimates calculate it costs $1 for Starbucks to make a cappuccino if you don't sit down in their restaurants. 36 cents for the coffee, milk and the sugar, 8 cents for the cup, lid and the little stirrer, and 56 cents for labor. Since labor is such a high cost of that cappuccino, we can understand Starbucks fighting the Starbucks unionizing drive. Starbucks may have to raise drink prices if labor costs rise. Instead of passing the wage costs on to consumers, they could reduce their profits. After all, cappuccinos at Starbucks don't cost $1. The excess goes to shareholders and to executives. It would be easier for Starbucks workers to unionize if they were a smaller part of total costs. Now, labor economists call this source of power a funny term. It's called the importance of being unimportant. In manufacturing, labor represents less than 50% of total costs. Therefore, ironically, with everything else held constant, it may be easier for an auto worker to unionize than a worker at Starbucks. Consider a martini. Would the olive or the gin have an easier time raising its wages? The olive, of course, because it is a small cost of the martini. So if its price doubled, it would only affect the cost of the martini slightly. However, if you are the gin and your wage increases, the cost of the martini will likely increase, and people might start to substitute margaritas for martinis. Now, Marshall's second determinant of labor demand is, does your wage hike push up prices? Will consumers walk away or absorb the cost? Now, people pay more for Starbucks coffee, but they may switch to Dunkin' Donuts if the price gets too high. Workers have to worry about consumers. Workers or a union must assess consumer demand for what they produce and ask themselves, if prices go up, will demand go down a lot or just a little bit? Is demand shrinking or rising? Worker demand is always derived from consumer demand. If the firm must raise prices because wages increase, you must determine whether consumers will reduce their demand due to those price increases. Now, the third determinant to consider is whether an employer can easily substitute workers with robots or with other workers. Are there available substitutes for you? And lastly, will those substitutes become more expensive if there's an increasing demand for them? The bottom line is that you have less bargaining power if your boss can easily substitute you. And lastly, will those substitutes become more expensive? When labor is indispensable, workers can get higher wages. If labor can be substituted and that substitute is cheaper, automatic baristas, anyone? The demand for labor will fall if wages rise. In modern technology, prices fall, wage increases may trigger a layoff. Now, the strength of your, what we call BATNA, or your best alternative to a negotiated agreement, depends upon whether you have an appealing offer from a competing company. You have more bargaining power if you are less dependent on the negotiation partner to reach your goals. You have more bargaining power and can place more pressure on them to meet your terms. In negotiation, answers to this checklist may help you determine how much bargaining power you have. How strong or appealing are my alternatives? Can I create a better alternative before the negotiation begins to gain more bargaining power? Should I save money? Should I line up another job? Do I have enough information about the employer to determine how much they will have to raise prices if I get my demands met? Do I have enough information about the employer's ability to substitute me? What can I do to improve their opinion of their inability to substitute me? What can I do to improve their opinion that demand for their product will increase even though they may raise my wages? In this lesson, we explored the relationship of bargaining power to labor demand and product or service demand. We assessed labor demand using the Marshallian determinants, and we defined BATNA, the best alternative to the negotiating agreement. I'd like to leave you with a checklist on power. What are my alternatives? Can I create better alternatives to the one I have? Can the employer pay me out of profits, or will they need to raise prices? Can the employer substitute me with someone else or a machine? Can I make them think I am an irreplaceable worker? Do they think their business will thrive? And am I needed for their growth? The next lesson will examine how bargaining power is affected by the government.